Before we dive in, make sure to subscribe to the channel and like the video so you won't miss any of our stories. I'm curious, where are you watching us from today? Drop your city in the comments. I love seeing where everyone is joining from. Now, let me tell you about the evening that started like any other, but ended in a way I never saw coming. I was leaving the office, tired but content with the day's work. It had been one of those weeks where every meeting seemed to stretch on forever, and yet, somehow, nothing ever got completely resolved. My heels clicked softly against the polished floors as I walked through the lobby, my bag slung over my shoulder, the scent of fresh coffee still lingering faintly in the air from the staff break room. The city outside was beginning to glow with the warm light of street lamps, and a cool breeze slipped through the revolving doors as I stepped out. I was halfway to my car when a voice called my name. It wasn't the usual cheerful greeting from a coworker or the rushed thanks of someone leaving for the day. It was calm, slightly hesitant, but unmistakably familiar. "Wait, you're leaving already?" I turned and froze for a moment. Standing a few feet away was Alex, my boss's son. I'd seen him around the office on a few occasions, usually at company events, always polite, always composed, but there was something different tonight, something in the way he hesitated before speaking. "Yes, I should get home before traffic gets too bad," I said, trying to keep my tone casual, though my pulse was quickening. There was an undercurrent in his voice, something unspoken that tugged at me. He took a small step closer, his hands stuffed in the pockets of his coat. The streetlights glinted off his glasses as he looked at me, not with the polite curiosity I'd expected, but with a kind of careful intensity that made me pause. "I know this might sound strange," he began, "but I wanted to tell you something before you left." I tilted my head slightly, intrigued despite myself. "Oh, what is it?" There was a brief silence. He seemed to be gathering courage, weighing his words. The air around us was cool, but it felt like it had thickened somehow, holding a quiet tension that made the moment feel far more intimate than the bustling city street deserved. "It's just, I've noticed you," he said finally. Not in the usual office way, but in a way that's hard to explain. I blinked, caught off guard. My mind raced. Compliments from young men weren't unusual, but there was something deeper here, something that felt like it bypassed the polite surface of casual acquaintance. His gaze was steady, sincere, almost vulnerable. I laughed softly, a nervous but genuine sound. Not many people notice the small things about me, I admitted. "What do you mean exactly?" He smiled faintly, a little shy but determined. "I mean, the way you carry yourself, the way you speak, the way you make people around you feel seen. It's rare." I felt a warmth spread through me, unexpected, tinged with a fluttering curiosity. There was a tenderness in his words that I hadn't anticipated. The world around us, the honking cars, the neon signs, the faint hum of the city, faded into a blur. For a moment it was just the two of us, sharing a space that felt both ordinary and charged with an unspoken connection. And then he did something even more surprising. He reached out, lightly brushing a strand of hair from my face. The contact was fleeting, but it sent a ripple through me, a whisper of an emotion I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years. "I know this is sudden," he said softly, "but I had to tell you before the moment passed. I don't expect anything. I just wanted you to know." I nodded, words failing me. There was something in his honesty, in his careful respect, that made me want to trust him instantly. And in that brief, charged moment, I realized this was the start of something entirely unexpected, a connection that was more than curiosity, more than simple attraction, something that could grow into understanding and something deeper. As I walked to my car, our eyes met again, and I felt a shiver of anticipation. The city lights shimmered around us, but for the first time in a long while, I felt a spark of possibility. an emotional intimacy that had arrived when I least expected it. After that evening on the street, I couldn't shake the memory of Alex's words. I kept replaying the moment, the way he looked at me, the gentle brush of his hand, the honesty in his voice. It was unnerving and exhilarating all at once. I had always considered myself pragmatic, cautious, and careful with my heart, but something about him made me feel lighter, like I could breathe a little differently. The next morning, the office felt unusually bright, even though the sky outside was a dull winter gray. I arrived early, trying to lose myself in routine, but my thoughts kept drifting. And then I saw him, Alex, walking into the lobby, looking slightly embarrassed but determined. "Good morning," he said, offering that faint, awkward smile I'd come to recognize. "Morning," I replied, trying to sound casual, though my chest fluttered. He lingered a moment, then cleared his throat. "I was wondering if you'd like to get a coffee later? Just, a quiet place to talk." Something about the simplicity of his invitation made me hesitate and hope all at once. This wasn't a bold declaration or a grand gesture. It was respectful, careful, and considerate. Exactly the kind of approach that drew me to him. "I'd like that," I said finally, surprising myself with the steadiness in my voice. The coffee shop we chose was small, tucked between two larger storefronts, with warm lighting and the faint aroma of roasted beans and pastries. We found a corner table by the window, where we could watch the city move outside, while our conversation drifted effortlessly between topics: work, family, books we'd read, and the quiet little pleasures that made life feel rich. It was during one of those pauses, when the conversation had lulled and only the soft clinking of cups filled the air, that I noticed something in his eyes. He wasn't just interested in talking to me. He was present, really present. And that presence, that quiet attentiveness, made me feel seen in a way I hadn't felt in years. "I never expected to meet someone like you," he said softly, his voice almost drowned out by the murmurs of other patrons. "Someone grounded, warm, and yet full of life." I felt a sudden deep warmth, almost an ache in my chest. "I could say the same about you," I admitted. "It's rare to feel understood without explanation." He smiled, and it was different this time, relaxed, genuine. He reached out and rested his hand on the table, a subtle but deliberate gesture. My fingers itched to brush against his, to feel the contact again, and I realized with a quiet thrill that I was no longer trying to analyze or rationalize what was happening. I was simply present with him. We spent hours there, losing track of time, caught in the intimacy of shared stories and gentle laughter. The initial tension that had made the encounter feel electric had softened into something tender, something that hinted at deeper emotional resonance. I was discovering a side of myself I hadn't allowed to surface in years, the willingness to trust, to connect, to be vulnerable in small, deliberate ways. When we finally stepped back onto the street, the city had changed. The afternoon light had softened into a golden haze, and the chill in the air seemed almost comforting. He walked me to my car, his presence steady and grounding. "Thank you," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "For today, for this." He gave me a small nod, his eyes warm and unguarded. "No, thank you. I feel the same." And in that moment, I understood something profound. Connections like this didn't have to be loud or dramatic. They could be quiet, subtle, and deeply transformative. As I drove home, the city lights flickering past, I felt a sense of anticipation, not the anxious kind, but a calm, thrilling awareness that my life was quietly shifting, and I was ready to see where it might lead. After that afternoon at the coffee shop, I found myself thinking about Alex constantly. It wasn't just a passing curiosity. It was something quieter, more insistent, like a gentle tug at the edges of my mind. I told myself to be careful, to respect boundaries, but I also couldn't deny the anticipation that had settled into my chest each time I thought about seeing him again. It wasn't long before another opportunity presented itself. One evening, I was still at the office, finishing some overdue paperwork. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, and the office was nearly empty, the quiet punctuated only by the occasional tap of my keyboard. I was gathering my things, ready to leave, when I heard the familiar voice again. "Still here?" Alex asked, stepping lightly into the office space. I looked up, startled but pleased. "Yeah, just trying to wrap things up." He smiled, that same calm, steady expression that always seemed to make the world pause for a moment. "Mind if I sit for a bit? I wanted to talk about something." Curiosity mingled with a quiet excitement. "Of course," I said, gesturing to the empty chair across from me. He lowered himself into the seat, and for a few moments we simply looked at each other, the hum of the office around us creating a private bubble of calm. Then he spoke, slowly, carefully, as though each word carried weight. "I've been thinking about the way we connected the other day," he said. "And I realized it's not just fleeting. I want to know you, really know you, if you're willing." There it was again, that combination of sincerity and respect that made my chest tighten. "I want that too," I admitted, my voice soft, almost shy. "I've spent so long keeping myself guarded, but with you, it feels different." He nodded, and the air between us shifted subtly, charged but gentle. "I know this might sound forward," he said, "but I don't want to rush anything. I just want honesty, moments that feel real." And that's exactly what we had. Over the next hour, we shared stories that were intimate in ways work conversations never allowed, about childhood memories, fears, regrets, dreams. I found myself laughing and sighing, opening up in ways I hadn't in years. The tension that had initially drawn us together had softened into a deep, unspoken trust, a recognition of one another as more than fleeting connections. At one point, he reached across the table, gently touching my hand. The contact was light, careful, and yet it spoke volumes. It wasn't about urgency or desire. It was about closeness, a subtle affirmation that he saw me, truly saw me, and I felt the same for him. I realized then that this connection wasn't just unexpected, it was transformative. It reminded me that emotional intimacy could exist outside the boundaries of conventional expectations, that a genuine bond could flourish even under surprising circumstances. As the evening drew on, I finally gathered my things, feeling a bittersweet reluctance to leave. Alex stood with me, and for a moment we just lingered, our hands brushing again, our eyes holding a silent conversation that didn't need words. "Thank you," I said softly, the quiet weight of the moment pressing against my chest. "For trusting me for this." He smiled, the kind of small, warm smile that made the world feel lighter. "Thank you," he echoed, "for letting me in." Walking to my car that night, I felt an unfamiliar sense of hope. I wasn't just leaving the office, I was stepping into something tender and real, a connection that promised growth, understanding, and a rediscovery of joy. The city streets shimmered around me, but I felt grounded, centered, and ready to see where this path might take us both. The days that followed felt almost surreal, like I was moving through a world that had quietly shifted into something richer, warmer, and unexpectedly tender. Alex and I had found a rhythm, small, meaningful moments, gestures that didn't need words, laughter that seemed to linger long after it passed. It wasn't flashy, dramatic, or rushed. It was steady, gentle, and real. One evening, I stayed late at the office again, finishing up a few projects that couldn't wait. The city outside had already settled into its nighttime glow, the streets bathed in the soft hum of streetlights and the distant sounds of traffic. I was about to leave when Alex appeared in the doorway, his expression calm, but carrying that quiet intensity that always made my chest flutter. "I was hoping I'd catch you before you left," he said, stepping closer. "You found me?" I replied, smiling, feeling that familiar warmth spread through me. He nodded, his eyes serious but tender. I wanted to say, "Thank you for trusting me, for letting me in. I know this isn't ordinary, and I don't want to take anything for granted." I felt a lump in my throat, overwhelmed by the sincerity in his words. "I should be the one thanking you," I said softly. "You've reminded me that connection, real connection, can happen when you least expect it. That it's okay to let someone see you, flaws and all." He reached for my hand, and this time the touch lingered just long enough to feel intimate without needing to cross any boundaries. "I want us to take our time," he said, "to really understand each other without pressure, without expectation. Just us." I nodded, feeling a quiet relief, a deep sense of belonging that I hadn't felt in years. "I'd like that," I whispered. For a while, we simply stood there, hands lightly intertwined, the soft city hum around us creating a private cocoon. I realized that what we had wasn't just a spark or a fleeting moment. It was a slow-burning connection, built on trust, respect, and a willingness to be vulnerable. It was rare, beautiful, and entirely unexpected. As I finally walked to my car, the night air crisp against my skin, I felt a sense of reflection settle over me. I thought about all the years I had spent guarded, careful not to let anyone too close, and I marveled at the unexpected gift of this connection. It wasn't about age, status, or convention. It was about two people seeing each other fully and honestly and choosing to be present. Driving home, the city lights reflected in the windshield like scattered stars, I allowed myself to breathe deeply and savor the moment. Life had a way of surprising you when you least expected it, and sometimes the most meaningful connections came from the most unexpected encounters. Alex's words, his presence, and the quiet understanding between us had opened a door I hadn't realized I'd been ready to walk through. And as I pulled into my driveway, I smiled to myself, feeling grateful for the unexpected, tender, and profoundly human journey that had begun with a single, unanticipated conversation on the street. For the first time in a long while, I felt truly seen, and for me, that was everything.